Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Open Discussions with Apxor. And this time around, we have a very special guest today with us. You can see two. But let me quickly introduce Sowmya to all of you. Sowmya Vajjala is a researcher in digital technology at the National Research Council, which is Canada's largest federal research and development organization. She recently co-authored a book, Practical Natural Language Processing, and this book was published by O'Reilly Media in June 2020. Apart from her research, Sowmya enjoys reading books, has co-founded the website pustakam.net in 2009. So I'm very excited to get started talking to Sowmya, especially about today's topic, which is the emerging role of data science and NLP in consumer products. Hi, Sowmya.
Hi, Akila.
It's great to have you here, and good morning. All the way from Canada.
Good morning, everyone. And it's Saturday morning for me here. And so we have a young guest along with me.
So this is pretty interesting for open discussions here. We have our first female guest, super mom, apart from all of these adjectives that I said about you. And we also have our youngest guest along with you.
We also have a baby, first baby guest.
This is very interesting. So to kick off our questions, let's start with a quick poll to all our audience here as I wait for more audience to come in. Great. So, Sowmya, you are a data scientist as well as a book lover. So, tell me about your website, pustakam.net, the long journey that it's been.
Yes, pustakam.net started in 2009. I and Purnima started it together as a forum for people to write about books they read. So the articles are primarily in Telugu, although we have some English articles, and people write about books from many different languages.
Right.
We even had people read books from languages such as Kannada in the original and then write about them.
Oh.
And we also do a lot of interviews with writers and publishers, sometimes outside India as well. Like we last year we interviewed a Canadian author, Drew Hayden Taylor, and almost 10 years back we interviewed the founders of Project Gutenberg. And we also interviewed Amish of Shiva Taylor 10 years back before he became very famous. I don't think we'll be able to do that now. So it has been running successfully. People, it's a bit slow these days because we are both busy in our professional life, but people have been contributing to pustakam.net regularly and keeping it alive and active.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great community also that you've built there along with the website. And that just goes to saying about the kind of problem that you were able to solve with pustakam.net. That's great. So, Sowmya, one other project of yours, which is your book. So could you talk about your book a little bit and let the audience know what it's about?
Yes, so the book is about, so natural language processing is useful in a range of different industries to solve many different kinds of problems. When you look at existing materials, existing textbooks for NLP, like there are, on one hand, there are these textbooks that are taught in school, in colleges,
right,
focus primarily on the algorithms and their complexity and things like that. On the other hand, there are books like cookbooks, which say like how to do say text classification using PyTorch or things like that.
Okay.
So our book, I think, takes the best of both worlds. And in my view, I mean, of course, in my view, our book is the best book in the world.
Of course.
So when we are building a system for like a software product or something like that, there are many different stages, right? Like starting right from how to create data that we need to build a machine learning system for NLP. To the point where, like, once you deploy a model, is that it? Like, shouldn't we update the model? How do we monitor? When do we decide when to update? We even have a part on where we discuss about how to hire AI teams and things like that. So we have like a lot of code examples as well as real world case studies. Like, say, for example, there is a chapter called NLP pipeline. At the end of the chapter, we show how this kind of pipeline is in use in Uber's customer ticketing assistant. And two versions for it. Like, first one is a normal regular machine learning version. The second one goes into a deep learning version, and they talk about why they did not start right away with deep learning and things like that. So each chapter case study like that, taking a real world use case.
Wow.
But I would not say it's only about practice, because we also have like close to 500 references in the book. We also talk about like state of the art research as well.
Great.
So in that way, I think it's like a full package for people who are interested in using building NLP software.
Perfect. So for the audience members here, keep an eye on the handout section, because we will also be handing out the link to take a look at Sowmya's book. I think you already have it. And members saying that they cannot hear us. Moderators, if you could and make sure that we are being heard. And I hope the audio is better now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Sowmya, my next question to you is very integral to why should data science be prioritized for a business? So how does data science help businesses? And, when in the stage of products development should they start hiring data scientists? And how do you start building a data science team? Those kind of questions. Could you help us out with that?
Yes. So compared to like say 5 years ago, I think data science is now being used in almost all stages of running a business. That need not necessarily even be a technical business. Like, for example, even with your tools, like even with Apxor tools, like do analytics with customer, why a customer is leaving, how to like customer retention and things like that, right? And there is also a lot of work on how to set up your marketing campaigns, targeted marketing campaigns using machine learning, or looking for who is the customer acquisition. There is a lot of work that goes into this stage of any product development using data science. But then there is also a lot of data science, especially NLP, with customer support. Like, how do you identify customer grievances, like say on social media? What are actionable items? Say, or what is the sentiment about a product? Or is like even things like review helpfulness that you see on Amazon. So there is a lot of data science even at that stage. And clearly, if the product itself is about language or something like that, there is a lot of data science involved there too. So I would say, like, I think irrespective of what is the nature of the business, data science has a role to play in many different stages.
And how do you think one can go about building a data science team? How do you begin with something like that?
So earlier, I was a part of a company where I was the first person, like as a data scientist in the data team. But with that experience, I can say that the first person to build in the team should really be an engineer, a machine learning engineer, or a data engineer, or somebody like that. Because an average data scientist need not necessarily be a good software programmer. Developing a prototype is very different from putting it in production.
Right. Okay.
Data scientist is the first person, and then you don't have a clear pipeline for data, or like once this data scientist builds a model, you don't have a clear procedures to build and deploy these models and then monitor them. Then at some point, it's going to be like the data scientist is going to be bored, and the whole company is going to be worried that nothing is coming out.
Okay.
So I would say the infrastructure needs to be set up first, like say like a data engineer or a machine learning engineer or even a software developer, somebody who ready to set up that, and then a data scientist must be hired only after that.
Okay, perfect. So let's now delve into some questions about data science and products together. So how do you think mobile products, consumer-facing mobile products like, say, Facebook, are using data science to improve their product, retain users, and things like that? So where does that come in for them?
Yeah, so Facebook is it's a large organization, right? It deals with a lot of user content, and there are also like a lot of research teams as well as development teams focusing on data science, machine learning, NLP, and things like that.
Right.
Keeping aside things like these infinite feeds, where like you keep scrolling and then you keep seeing something, right? You keep seeing something related. So they need to show something related. There is some amount of data science there, but then there are also many other things, like say it translates posts from other languages. I like last week I was seeing a post where a friend of mine, a researcher, posted something about a Korean study. Like user study inviting participants who are like Korean speakers. The whole post was in Korean, but we saw it in English.
Wow.
So some of my English-speaking friends then said, "I want to participate in this study," and then they were told that. Then we realized, because we didn't notice that it was originally in Korean. It's
Wow.
the whole translation seemed that good, basically.
Perfect.
So that's just one small case of where data science can be useful to just keep customers or keep users in the whole loop. And also a lot of data, right? Like, so we like pages, we chat with friends, we look at videos and things like that. So all that is some data about like what we like, what we don't like. They build some kind of profile for ourselves. The models build some kind of profile for ourselves, right? Apart from what we say about ourselves explicitly.
Right. That makes sense.
Data science is needed for that as well. And then when you say, for example, search on Facebook saying, friends who live in Paris and these kind of things, you can search like that, like with a graph.
Okay.
I mean, when we are doing it for like, we don't pay to use Facebook, but then we have all these features. That means the goal of Facebook in providing all these things is to keep us there, but also collect all this data from us, right?
Absolutely. Right. Okay. So just for the audience members here, so an audience member says they cannot hear you. Hoping the connection stabilizes a little bit because it's raining a lot here in Hyderabad specifically. So I hope network is okay. And everyone else, if you have any questions for Sowmya, please feel free to drop them in the chat section, and we'll get to audience questions in a little bit, pretty soon. So Sowmya, my next question for you is, what, according to you, is the road to an ethical process of using data? Now that we just spoke about the data that's being collected, especially say,
yeah, it's actually a tough question to answer, because even the research community in machine learning just started to notice these things in the past like 3 or 4 years. But then especially with apps like Facebook, the question is that we are not exactly paying to use those services, right? So what do they get out of it? They get us, like, we are the data for them, right? Usually, like, when people probe more into ethics of these kind of approaches, there are certain things that they consider, like, fairness. Are these models clearly discriminating about against some group of people, like the criticism about face recognition models? There is also something about some time back. There was also something about Amazon's resume information extractor being biased against female candidates.
Oh, okay.
This was a couple of years back. I think they took off. They stopped using that later, once this was found out. And there is a major issue of consent. Like, are we taking these? Are collecting all this data, and these things are being used by people, researchers and developers everywhere? Do we have consent of these people? Like a very popular computer vision dataset called ImageNet, which everybody uses to build image recognition algorithms. I heard it around April this year, where the speaker was showing examples from ImageNet, which had private images, like a kid playing with her parent in their bathroom and things like that. Like, their faces were visible. Of course, we all don't know, as normal people, we all don't know who they are, but they or their friends may identify people, right? A lot of criticism in these lines these days. There is a lot of criticism in these lines in these days, looking at like how exactly should we collect this data. Because if the data itself is biased, that's a problem. But if the data has this kind of privacy violations, that's another problem.
That's an issue. Yes.
So I don't think there is a clear known solution yet. People are just proposing things. Last week we had our reading group where we were reading about this issue, like what are the good practices to follow for data collection for machine learning. But eventually, like, we all felt that this paper does not have any actionable suggestions yet. Like, this paper came from Google. Like, at the end of the paper, we all were left with the feeling like, so what exactly should we do to avoid these things? Because nobody knows yet. Like, they all started to think about this. So, yeah.
Right. But there is work going on, right? So
there is a lot of work going on in this.
Interesting. So could you also touch on another interesting aspect that we all usually think about, which is, the vernacular products in Bharat, in India, where how do you think NLP can aid in creating or making these products better?
Yeah, even in this, actually, there has been a lot of work in the past 5 years. Like there have been several apps that are coming up which work with Indian languages, like say apps that translate chats, or apps that show the interfaces in local languages, or where like say there is an app, I forgot its name. What it does is basically it provides voice instructions in Indian languages for people who can't use these banking apps and things like that.
Wow, interesting.
Sorry. So the problem with those apps is like they're not exactly easy to navigate for like a layperson.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they may even change their interfaces a little bit, right? But then they also have like serious consequences if you make a mistake. Like our money will go away somewhere.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
There are some Indian language startups focusing on this issue, like helping users,
Interesting.
kind of things. And then there is also like Google does a lot of stuff on input, like how do we type in Indian languages, or how do we speak, speech-based input, or I use handwriting recognition on phone for Telugu. That's one form of input. And there is a transcribe service like for people who are hearing impaired. So the goal is people who are hearing impaired, but anybody can use it. Like there is a transcribe app on Google phones.
Right.
Which I think it works for Telugu. I clearly remember reading out some newspaper article and seeing a transcription when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of startups coming up in that direction now.
Right. Great.
And the startups are also being acquired by slightly larger companies. So yeah.
So audience, again, out our polls wherever you can, and also the handout for Sowmya's book is right there. So be sure to take a look at it as well for new members who are just joining in. Sowmya, my next question for you is about how do you think language translation can happen in real time? So, say in-app pop-ups or in-app launch kind of things.
Yeah, it's so it's something called simultaneous translation.
Okay.
So I remember that Google has a service for that, like Interpreter API or something like that. And then there's also a lot of startups coming up in that area to do this kind of simultaneous translation, even in Indian languages. Like I don't remember the names of these apps off the top of my head. I was reading these things last week or so. Sorry about that. I was reading last week or so. There is an app called Narad or something that is for Indian languages.
Uh-huh.
And there are many such apps which do this multilingual simultaneous translation. It's actually an active research community around simultaneous translation. This year, so ACL, Association for Computational Linguistics, that's a major NLP conference gathering. So at ACL this year, there was a workshop on simultaneous translation where researchers from Google, Microsoft, and all these companies gave talks about what they are doing for simultaneous translation.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I think like there's generally a lot of interest. I'm not sure how these things work specifically for Indian language context, but it seems to be like a growing kind of area.
Perfect. So that is something that in the future that's being done right now, and this is one other application that will go with. So, Sowmya, another question I have specifically about these in-app kind of pop-ups that we were talking about is in user surveys. Typically, the feedback that is collected is usually free-form text. So, how do you think a sentiment analysis can be performed to make sense of this, and also say even in e-commerce, for example, how could you understand?
Yeah, sentiment analysis is actually a very well studied kind of area of NLP, and it has been in use practically for a very long time now.
Okay.
So there are like many different libraries that do sentiment analysis. Like so, even these big providers like Google, Microsoft, IBM, Watson, they all provide some kind of sentiment analysis API.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That's one way you can, if you want to incorporate sentiment analysis, that's always an option for you to pay, and they're like pay as you go services. But then because it's such a common problem, there are like many available open source libraries that you can use, which are mostly free, but then I don't know how actively they are maintained. That's another issue.
Right.
A third aspect to this is well, I mean, it's called aspect-based sentiment analysis. Like when we write about something, there may not be one sentiment to that. Like if somebody is writing a restaurant review, they may say the cost, it's very pricey, but then the service is good, food is not that good, these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we say if for one such kind of review, what do we say what the sentiment is?
Right.
Like for our book on Amazon, one of the review was the book is very good, but paper quality is very bad, and then he gave a 1 star, he or she.
Okay.
So keeping the star aside, if somebody says book is very good but print quality is very bad, what exactly is the sentiment? Like in the aspect of content, okay, the book is good, but in the aspect of printing quality, it is bad.
Right.
So kind of things you may also see in your customer service, right? There may not be one sentiment.
Yeah.
It's called aspect-based sentiment analysis.
Okay.
It is. It's not as prevalent as the normal sentiment analysis, but then there are also like some libraries that do this kind of thing. But the challenge with aspect-based analysis is that it's also dependent on domain, right? Like for restaurant, aspects can be like food, price, service, and these kind of things. But for say a phone, aspects can be different. It can be like, I don't know, camera or I don't know, screen size or something like that.
Right.
So that's the challenge with if you want to do aspect-based analysis in your surveys, because you need to know like what the potential kind of things customers may talk about.
Absolutely. And for our audience here, you can check out this article that talks about capturing the right user sentiments. It's right here. So be sure to take a look at the article that we just put out. And Sowmya, now I want to know, what are some applications? So in that aspect, we see how Google is doing really great with almost perfect autocomplete text suggestions. So
Akhila, I can't hear you.
okay, let me just come closer to my microphone here. So we now observe that Google is doing really great with almost perfect autocomplete suggestions, right? So how are they doing that? How are the applications here?
So autocomplete applications for those kind of things are based on some kind of neural network. So these networks see language as a sequence of words. So they are trained with the goal that given some previous words, what will the next few words be? So that is how autocomplete primarily works in emails. So you write something and then you get some suggestions, or if somebody emails you and then you get like a starting sentence or phrase for your reply.
Right,
and then you keep seeing more and more suggestions based on the context. They may not always be accurate, so it is risky to just select it randomly without looking at it. I think anybody who has used this mode would have faced that scenario where they unintentionally sent something. Like yesterday, I saw something on LinkedIn. So some guy lost his job due to COVID, so he posted on like, I'm looking for jobs, please connect me and all. And one of the comments was congratulations.
Right.
Sure, it was one of those autocomplete suggestions and somebody just clicked on it without looking at it. So there are always those challenges. But when we talk about autocomplete, there is also the other autocomplete that we use on Google search. When we start typing a query, it shows you some options of how to complete the query. That is different from this. That need not necessarily have a neural network, because there you have a search log of what people are typing for. So that can be used to give those suggestions.
Right, interesting. So now that we are already talking about search, how can consumer and companies or e-commerce companies, to be specific, use NLP to improve their search performance and search relevance? How is that done?
Yeah, actually, e-commerce has a different kind of search compared to your regular Google search. Firstly, you don't have to search the whole web. You only have to search your product inventory. But the product inventory is also ever growing, hopefully. And people may search for like the question is also about getting some kind of information from product descriptions or like even images, and then figuring out a way to group these products together, or extracting the attributes so that when people search for like, say, what is the best phone around or something, you can group them in terms of like, if you want say big screen size, these are the kind of options you have. If you want, say, a good camera, these are the kind of options you have. So some kind of faceted search.
Right.
To be able to do any of these kind of things, you need a product hierarchy, right? You need to have some way of building a product hierarchy. So all these are different aspects of search in e-commerce compared to building a generic search engine.
Okay. Interesting. Great. So, audience, yet again, I want to again remind you about the polls and the handouts that we have here for you. And we also have, feed ranking or search related uh, blog post on our Absor blog. So be sure to check that out as well if you can. So,
Yeah, sorry, you see all my family here today because it's Saturday morning.
yes, I can imagine. It's pretty early for you on a Saturday morning as well in Canada.
Yeah, it's about 7:30 now, so we started at around 7 a.m.
Oh wow. Okay. That's great. So do you want me to keep going, Sowmya?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Great. So I my next question is actually about GPT-3. So how
Okay.
do you see GPT-3 affecting the product, map in India or across the world? Where do you see the applications of GPT-3?
So yeah, GPT-3 is like, I mean, it created a lot of news, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started feeling that not everybody, okay, some people I knew started feeling that NLP is solved now, everything can be solved with GPT-3. But then there has also been a lot of criticism on it from people who work in that area.
Okay.
One of the major criticisms is that we can't verify the factuality of what GPT-3 is producing.
Okay.
So in some applications, like say I'm a journalist, I'm producing an article for a newspaper and I use GPT-3. The challenge is I may produce perfectly readable, fluent grammatical text, but I just don't know whether it is right or wrong.
Right.
There was an example of COVID-19, so text generation about COVID-19 using GPT-3 by somebody a few days back.
Mm-hmm.
The prompt given was something like COVID-19 vaccine or something like that, and then GPT-3 produced a text with a lot of statistical data saying as if vaccine is already there and it's in the market and things like that.
Right.
So this kind of creates opportunities for fake news, right?
Right.
Misinformation. So those are some problems that exist with GPT-3.
Mm-hmm.
However, I said a lot of problems about it. There are also some places where it can be useful, like say things like using it for say spelling and grammar correction. That's one place where I can see potentially it could be useful.
Okay.
Or for people who are writing more creative text, it can give more creative ideas because all a neural network does is basically hallucinating some text based on what it already saw. So those are, and also I think like it learns a representation of text. It's a neural network and it learns a representation of text. So that representation itself, not the eventual text it produces, the numeric representation of text, that can be used as like to build many downstream applications, like say text classification or something like that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sure there are many more. These are the things I could think of right now.
So, something you just mentioned, which is, fake news and things like that. In your book, you touched upon all of these aspects for social media specifically. So, policing, fake news, virality, and things like that. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit of how NLP can help us there?
Yeah, there has been some work on detecting fake news based on the assumption that fake news has certain characteristics, like there is like some kind of hyperbolic descriptions of things, or things that look very believable but cannot be verified. Like people combine factual information verification kind of approaches with fake news detection to decide whether a news is real or fake. And there's also some kind of work where people try to detect whether text is human generated or machine generated.
Okay.
So these things are like, they're not as good as we want them to be yet. But people are working on them, and there are like some demos of fake news detectors and things like that. Even my previous institution, IIIT Hyderabad, I think also has a fake news detector on their website. In the search lab has a detector demo there.
Okay.
So and I'm sure in a people are there are dedicated teams working on this in larger companies focusing on this, like Facebook focusing on these problems. But I don't think there is like a generic fake news detector API or something that anybody can use, like pay as go use, but it will come.
Yeah, not yet, huh?
Not yet.
Yeah.
And there's like it's one of the very active areas of research now, like fake news detection, misinformation spread detection, and distinguishing between human and artificially generated text. So these are all kind of topics that generated a lot of interest, and the growth of GPT-3 like models only increased research in that direction because there are no concerns about how these models will be used.
Right. So, audience, I would let you know that you can ask your questions in the chat section. We'll quickly move on to audience questions pretty soon. So make sure if you have any question to put it right there. So Sowmya, let's move to our next question, which is, do you see our typical B2B and B2C products becoming instruction and command ready, be it voice, be it text? How soon do you see that happening, and how do you think that'll be useful?
I think it will happen soon because there is a lot of work in that voice assistance area. Like we also use it on our phone, right? Like Google Assistant or Siri or things like that. So some of them, like Siri, used to not do well with Indian accents in the past. Like so, I used to teach before a couple of years back, 2 or 3 years back, when I was doing this. There was a case study of these kind of voice assistants in a entry level undergraduate class.
Okay.
They were all American students, so it was identifying well when they speak, but it was doing very poorly when I speak with accent. I hope that got better with Siri, but in general, like even assistants like Google Home do pretty well with many different kinds of accent and languages. In fact, Google has not probably Google Home, but Google has speech to text for a lot of Indian languages as well. And for Tamil, it actually supports 4 different accents like Sri Lankan, Malaysian, Indian, and there was something else.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, considering that there is so much of work in that direction, and there are also companies just focused on doing this kind of voice-based chatbots now. So, considering that there is so much interest in this direction, I would expect that they will come soon into any product, like where you have some kind of restricted conversation happening. It's not like, I can talk about anything in the world and then the conversation can continue, because there are like, if you see these things as some use case of voice-based chatbots, then there are like different kinds of chatbots. Like one of them is simple FAQ chatbot that we see on these company websites. You ask a question, the customer asks a question, and they database of questions and answers, and it retrieves the most closest one to what this customer asked. There is, assuming that the speech text is doing well, and which I think it is. There are the other kind of are more like flow, like ordering a pizza. You still have certain restricted thing. Like you don't talk about the movie that you watched yesterday when you're ordering a pizza. Hopefully, these two, I think, as chatbots are getting better in these two areas, so we may be able to see something soon. The third one is like an open conversation kind of thing. So I can talk about, the way we probably can use, say, Siri or Google Assistant or something like that. I can ask it about weather, but then I can also ask it about, like, say something like play something that cheers me up or something like that. So when I change the topic, it probably changes the topic and answers, but then it keeps no track of the flow of the topics, because it's actually a challenging problem. Like you can't converse with a computer like you do with a human yet. And that is also again an active area of research. Like people are there's like one of my co-authors is also working a lot on conversational chatbots for with reasoning, like chatbots that can actually chat with reasoning.
Wow. Okay.
So I think that kind of chatbots may take time to get general to be used generally everywhere, but the first two kinds, I can see them coming to businesses soon. I think a lot of businesses already started doing some form of it.
Right. And right now, a lot of products here, especially in India, are very interested in chatbots for interfacing with users directly. So across verticals again, be it edtech, health tech, even next for these kind of chatbots that are.
Can you repeat? I think I lost your voice in between.
I'm sorry. So speaking of chatbots, I see a lot of interest in chatbots here in the Indian ecosystem specifically across verticals. Like as you said earlier, fintech, and there's education tech, health tech, e-commerce. There's a lot of applications there. So where do you see these kind of chatbots improving or going to the next level?
Like in Indian languages, you mean?
Be it in Indian languages or any other way. So what's next for these chatbots to help us out?
I think the next for these chatbots is to sound as natural as possible and remember the past, because the way we, I mean, at least the chatbots that I tried, they don't maintain track of what I said, like, a minute ago.
Right. So I think
And there's no continuity. Like each time I have to ask it like a new question.
right. Okay.
So I think the next, I mean, there's a lot of research going in that direction. So maybe, hopefully, that aspect of it will improve. Like the relative naturalness of chatbots probably will improve as time passes. I never used any Indian language chatbot so far, so I can't comment on that. I used only English ones.
Right. Well, we can't wait to surprise you. Hopefully that happens soon here for us.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are, like, I read about some startups also that do this kind of Indian language chatbots and messaging apps and things like that. But I just did not use them.
Right. So, Sowmya, another question I have for you is about where do you see on-device federated learning changing and being implemented in the coming years? Is it going to be big in products?
I would think so, because there is a lot of interest even in big companies on doing this kind of, for example, machine learning on the chip. Say Google has this TensorFlow deep learning models, but then it also has TensorFlow Lite for deploying these models on the device, which I know is being used by several companies. So a friend of mine who works in Samsung Research also said they're also developing NLP models that are self-sufficient on a mobile phone.
Oh, okay.
So I think there's a lot of interest in that direction, primarily for one main reason, which is privacy.
Okay.
So because there are a lot of use cases of these kind of models where people don't want to send data to Google servers.
Right.
I work for Canadian government, so there is a lot of concern about what we use, how we use outside resources with government data. Okay. Like nobody wants me to put this stuff on Google Translate and then see, because then it goes to the server and we don't know what they do. Or even using voice recognition. So a few years back, I was working with psychologists. Okay. They were developing some kind of interface, the voice-based interface, to collect doing some kind of parent interviews with children who have autism or some other such disorder. Okay. So they wanted a voice-based interface. We were exploring options, but they were very, very reluctant to use this Google Speech API and these kind of things, not because they don't have funds. Their concern is that this data should not go out of the place where they are doing this survey. I think federated learning can address that to some extent. Absolutely. And another thing about federated learning is that it's by design personalized. So I think that some of it is already happening. Like, say, for example, handwriting recognition that I use on Google phone. Part of it is still personalizing to what I do. I don't know whether it is being done on device or going to the server. Okay. I didn't explore that in detail yet. Okay. There's some amount of personalization, but then we don't know about the privacy, because I'm a lot of times when I use that app, it gives me some prompt saying, there is an error, it is being sent to server and so on. Oh. We see that prompts for like everything, right? Like even when your Windows or any other laptop crashes, sometimes like they say, like report or something like that. Yeah. So anyway, to bring us back into the question again, I think there is a lot of interest in that direction, like on the device models and things like that. And we may see more in that direction. I mean, I think we are already seeing. It's just that it's not so on your face visible. You see it only when you're looking for it.
Ah, nice way to put it. And so I'm coming to a very interesting question, which is, you are our first female speaker, as I said already while introducing you. I want to understand what the perception of women is like in the field of data science, and what differences you've seen being a woman who works in data science across the countries that you've worked in.
Okay, so I should say I'm actually fortunate to be working in data science at a time where there are a lot of other women working in data science, like at different levels. I mean, you also see women CTOs and CEOs for different kinds of startups. May not be like for super big companies, but I've been to places where I heard women CTOs speak, and there is a lot of general interest on what they speak and all. And in academia, where I spent most of my time, I've been fortunate to see a lot of women professors senior to me. So I would say like it's a nice area to work on relatively.
Right.
But like, I mean, I worked in many different, like 4 different countries. I also worked in them in different stages of my career.
Okay.
So like say in India, when I was working, I was just starting out fresh engineer. So I think, and at that time, I don't remember seeing clear women bosses or anybody. Although I had a lot of peers who are women. And also I felt, okay, this might have changed, but I felt there is like, when you are talking to a woman in a professional setting, it's not really that professional because people keep talking about, how do you look, how do you speak, and these things. I didn't realize it is a little bit abnormal until I left the country. But it's also possible that as I grew further in my career, I didn't interact with that kind of people. So I can't generalize and say that, this is the difference. I'm pretty sure it's everywhere, like even now. Absolutely. So that's one major difference, I think, for women in tech. Like, whatever you do, there may be people who still focus on, are you a good mother? Are you like, are you dressing up properly? Are you behaving properly? If a woman is aggressive at work, generally perceived as, domination. But if a man is aggressive at work, it's just, he's just ambitious. Yeah. I mean, I've seen these kind of things happening. So I can't say it happens everywhere across the world or in all companies, but I think these are some of the differences for women in tech in general and for women in data science in particular. But now I'm of the impression that women in data science are relatively better off.
Ah, right. I feel like it's. I wanted to make a video about this, but just because of the deep learning, they're more enlightened. It's in a different league. But Sowmya, I think it's now time to take some audience questions. We have a couple here already.
Okay.
So Neha asks us, how can companies compete with each other in terms of NLP of customer feedback? What can be the differentiating factor?
I think differentiating factors also depend on what kind of domain are you working on, right? So there are some standard NLP problems related to customer feedback. Like what exactly are they saying? Some kind of using some key phrase extraction or something like that. Like you see reviews that mention, and then you see some phrases. When you click phrases, you see reviews that mention those phrases.
Right.
Or doing some kind of sentiment analysis on customer feedback, trying to understand is this person talking good about our product or not. Right. Or there is also this helpfulness rating in Amazon. Right. So like a number of people thought it is helpful. That is different from sentiment, because there you are looking at how much information does this review provide about the product. Like some people can provide very elaborate reviews about product saying this aspect is good, this aspect is bad, and so on. Right. But then somebody can just say, I didn't like this product.
Okay.
So those are two different things, right? I mean, both of them can have negative sentiment, but then one thing can be helpful and one thing cannot be helpful. Right. So these are like some standard customer feedback problems you may encounter. Okay. Like, I mean, anybody working on customer feedback may look at these problems. But then there are some other specific things, like say, let us say I'm working with tweets, Indian language tweets, or people who tweet with multiple languages. Like writes a tweet in Hindi and English mixed language, criticizing the product. So that's a new challenge. That's a challenge that probably some other companies, like American companies or something, may not think about, because they don't have this kind of scenario. Right. That's a new challenge, but it's also a very difficult challenge to solve.
Okay.
And there may be other things like, even again in the Indian context, like people come from many different backgrounds. Your product users may be speaking 20 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
Then you need one consolidated view of what people think about your product.
Right, right. Okay.
They may write in Bangla or Assamese or Hindi or Telugu, but then you need to know, you need to know what they are saying. That's one thing, but you need to also know the general perception.
Right, right.
Not in one language, there are 20 different languages. So what are you going to do? So that's another, I think, really unique challenge
For India.
specific to Indian context or any other society where they speak many different languages.
Right, right. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there are more, but I should stop at some point.
No, but we are very interested. You can keep them coming. But I see that there are a lot more questions that are being populated by our audience here. So let me just quickly ask you. Manota is asking us, can you share some tips on how to keep tracking the recent updates in the NLP domain? Right.
That is actually a very challenging problem for everyone, including. So there are certain newsletters and podcasts that are well known. Like there is a NLP newsletter by Sebastian Ruder, which I don't think it's coming recently these days, but it used to come every two weeks. And there are also some other newspapers that recently started. Like there's a company called Hugging Face, which does a lot of deep learning for NLP. There's a Hugging Face newsletter, and then there is a company called Quantum Stats, which also it's a recent startup, but they're also doing a lot of work on compiling collections of freely available NLP datasets and things like that. And they also blog a lot about what are some cool research papers we read about and things like that. And other than that, I also follow Medium. So there's a Medium website called Towards Data Science. It's pretty generic, basically, like it's data science, so it can be anything. But then there are some NLP focused articles. And if you want to read core research papers, there is archive.org. They have a daily newsletter where like people upload their preprints, like non-peer reviewed versions of their research papers. Daily updates, and you can surely be overrun because there will be like 20-25 papers every day sometimes. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it is difficult to keep track of each and every single thing that is happening in the field, because even compared to when I started, or even compared to like 2 or 3 years back, there are many people working on NLP these days. Like the submissions used to be in a few hundreds when I started, but last week, like yesterday or the day before, one of the NLP conferences published its statistics. There were like 4,000 submissions or something like that.
Wow.
Which some things got accepted, and it's not the only event every year. Like every year there are like 3 or 4 such events where people publish. Wow. Each of the events became like ran into thousands now. Like there was the conference that happened earlier this year, I think had 6,000 submissions or something. And like, I mean, it's like a big field now. A lot of people want to work on it in terms of even research. So it's difficult to keep track. I mean, you can't keep track of everything 100%. Maybe what you can do is, choose certain areas and then follow these newsletters and see what's happening in these subfields.
Oh, great. And I think we picked up a couple of pointers on where to look if we want intense research. If we want to just read. I have a question, Sowmya. It says, what would be the best way to optimize and get better search results or suggestions?
On Google search, or is it like anywhere? Or
well, the question was generic, but you can have your pick.
Yeah, I mean, okay, Google search probably is the most common scenario everybody faces, right? So there are a lot of search keywords and shortcuts that Google has. They're not like I said before, they're not on your face, but then they're documented somewhere. Like if you go to advanced search, or like if you even just search for Google search shortcuts online, you'll find these links where they say like, how do you search only in a website, or how do you search for a particular phrase along with another phrase, and things like that. Like I use Google Scholar a lot, and then Google Scholar's advanced search also has things like, how can I search for a phrase in one particular journal, not the entire Google Scholar. I think using those kind of strategies, and sometimes like if I'm searching for, like say, for example, in Telugu, There is no standard way of certain people write certain words in different ways. There is no standard way of writing things. Sometimes people fuse words together like sandhi. Sometimes they write separately. But for a search engine, they are two different things. They are not the same. Like,
Right.
I mean, Indian language search is not there yet.
Right.
Accurate with spelling correction or things like that. So in such cases, I usually do multiple searches, with some slight variations of words, so that we'll get what we want. So I don't know if this was the intended question, but I don't think there is one clear set of things you need to do. You need to maybe massage the search query a little bit, rephrase it, and take a look at what are the options provided for in Google search. Like in some websites, they even do this regular expression based search and all these things. Like, so it depends on the website as well. Right. Obviously, if you can't do regular expression based search on a scale as Google, I think. Right. But like there was one article I was reading some time back, which was doing like code search using regular expressions and things like that. So in those kind of scenarios, your strategies are different.
Interesting. Okay. So we have Priyanka asking us this question: why didn't Amazon Prime increase the efficiency factor of their search engine?
This has been a constant question even for me, and we keep talking about it even at our home.
Okay.
Why bad? So our conclusion is that they don't have an incentive. Oh. Because Amazon Prime subscription is not really for watching those movies itself, right? It's for Prime shipping and these kind of things. Right. And it's not like a lot of money. Like when you like some time back, I was reading this article where it claims that Amazon Prime is not exactly a profitable thing for Amazon. But then they still continue investing in it because it's a large customer base, right? Right. But considering compared to the amount that we pay for Amazon, like I think it's like $10 per month or something here. I don't clearly remember. Considering the amount that we pay for it, and then considering the fact that we get free shipping and all those other features, I think they don't have an incentive to improve their search in the app, in the Prime app, for or something like that. Right. So the best way is I usually Google search for Prime and find the movie. This has been actually a common reply from people who don't want to invest in their search engine. Like I was talking to somebody who works for a newspaper, like a big newspaper, and I was telling them, your search is so bad, why don't you do something about it? And then the response was, oh, we are not interested in that because people will anyway use Google to search articles. And I think that's probably the logic of even this Prime search team.
Very handy. Right. Oh, Sowmya, we have an interesting question here which says, how would you like to use NLP for your own website, pustakam.net?
Okay, so one word answer is I don't want to use. Because I don't see pustakam.net with that lens. That's a different thing for me. But then if you want to use, there are a lot of NLP. It's a lot of textual content. So there are a lot of NLP problems lying there waiting to be solved. Search, we use the default WordPress search, which is not exactly optimized for Indian languages. Okay. And there is a lot of people submit the articles and we manually go through them and publish them, but we don't there is no clear spell checker or grammar checker or things like that, or suggest something that suggests a better phrase or those kind of things. Right. Then there can be something like suggesting related articles, or grouping articles by their topics. So we now use tags, but then the tags are given by us manually. Okay. Tags categories, but then they can be automatized. So there are many different problems if one wants to do it. But I don't think I have the incentive to do all those things, or I neither have the interest nor incentive to do all those things.
So you're not trying to commercialize your passion project, is it?
No, I don't have such ideas, because it's also, it's easy to say, why don't you commercialize after all these years? But people who say that usually forget that anything that has to be commercialized also requires a lot of work. Right. Whether you are willing to do that work and whether you have time to do that work like two important questions that people who make this comment usually don't consider. Because giving the comment is very easy, but thinking about actually how to do that takes up a lot of time and energy. Oh, wow.
Need a moment.
My husband came.
Oh. Running out of time, we have just a couple of final questions. So Venkat is asking us, could you suggest a good approach on identifying context of an article or a web page? I see a couple of ways like using keyword sequence with pre-classified keyword segments and a few sources suggesting to use pattern recognition, which helps multilingual. Could you answer this question?
I don't think I understand the question properly. Like, what does context mean? Does it mean some kind of like topical content or something like that?
I'm assuming so. Context of an article based on its text.
Yeah, again, this I think links back to the problem of automatic tagging that I mentioned about, and also key phrase extraction. Like, say in Google News, when you go to news.google.com, you see a bunch of news articles, but then on the side you also see like people in the news or topics in the news, something like that. When you click on that, you see all the news articles related to that person or related to that topic.
Right.
So that's one way of identifying what the article is about.
Okay.
In a very abstract way, I think it is impossible to understand what an article is about, because an article can be about many different things for many different people. There are some common NLP methods, like say key phrase extraction or extracting names of entities, like names of people, organizations, and things like that, or event extraction, so that you can use them as a summary for what the article is about.
Okay, interesting. So we have a question about what is the infrastructure required for building autocomplete suggestion models? And I think you answered this question earlier on in our session. So I'm gonna move ahead from that. There's another question which says, will AutoML take over data scientists?
This is an interesting question. We've been talking about this. I've also been reading about this a lot.
Okay.
So, of AutoML is basically like you give some data and it figures out how to run different combinations of models on its own, and then eventually show you the best model. But then the challenge still remains, like, where do you get this data and what exactly do you want to feed to the model? Like, you know, you have to, like, suppose there are a lot of videos, you can't directly give videos to the AutoML, because there needs to be some way of converting it into some numeric representation. Right? So there is that part where you still, like, you need a data scientist. And then a better model is built, then there should be some way of evaluating whether it is really better for a human. Like, the perception of what is a good model for a machine is different. It has some accuracy or something which it optimizes on. Okay. But then it did not necessarily do well with like real data. Because when we build a model, we have some kind of training data and some kind of test data, in gold standard data. Typically, it remains constant or changes very infrequently. Okay. So you build a model on training data and see how it is working on test data. But then when it is deployed in real world, it need not necessarily be your test, same as your test data. Their users can use it in whatever way they want. Right. So I would think AutoML now, or even several years later, will aid data scientists, but it can never replace data scientists. Right. Great. It's just like people talk about, there is a lot of legal AI startups coming up now. So people talk about that it as like, are they going to replace lawyers? Or there is a lot of work on AI-based analysis of these X-rays and MRAs and all these things. Then people say, like, are they going to replace doctors? One answer for these things that I've been consistently seeing in like the talks that I heard is that a lawyer who knows AI is always better than a lawyer who does not know AI. He's going to be better than the lawyer who does not know AI. Similarly, a doctor who understands that AI is probably going to be a better surgeon compared to somebody who is very skeptical about the whole technology and refuses to use it. Right. I don't think these replace these relatively skilled professions. Actually, AI is not also going to replace relatively skilled professions of a different kind, like plumbers, carpenters, and people like that. Absolutely, yeah. So Sowmya, we just run out of time. We have one
question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you that. Do you have any favorite architecture among the DL architectures for NLP?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, my daughter was playing.
Do you have any favorite architecture among the DL architectures for NLP? That's the question.
Not really.
Mhm.
Maybe BERT. So the model BERT has been very popular, and there has been some, but primarily it's not because BERT is very like extraordinary compared to other models or something. It was just because I found it more easy to use a BERT model and then tune it for a standard data set for other languages, for non-English languages. I found the process straightforward, but then I also did not extensively work with other models because something new keeps coming up every single day. And if your primary focus is not on using the next available model, but actually on solving some specific concrete problems, then you like it's hard to keep up with every single approach. I felt like BERT has also been like some kind of revolutionary changer in this kind of models, because lot many things came up after that.
Okay.
I mean, I would like to see the whole NLP research around that topic as before BERT and after BERT.
Oh, wow. Pretty groundbreaking. But
that's my personal opinion.
right. But that answer really flew over my head. So I'm going to pretend like I understood. I'm going to not. Which leads me to my final question that I want to ask you today. What would you say are your tips for students or product managers, anybody who's interested to getting into data science, getting started, getting ahead?
So there is a lot of stuff out there to read and try out.
Okay.
So but then it can also confuse people. So I have like I've answered this question before, like 2-3 days back. I was actually doing a small guest lecture in a friend's course where there was this question. So I know how to answer this to students now. Actually, there are two primary things that I think anybody interested in data science should be willing to do. First, like we also talked about several times in the past 1 hour, the field keeps changing. Not just NLP, but in general, like many different aspects of data science, new things keep coming up every single day, and it's not going to change. So we need to change. We need to adapt to the new things coming up. And I think in smaller companies, software companies, which have data science teams, you don't have the liberty of saying, "Hey, I know only NLP. I'm going to work on only NLP," or something like that.
Right.
I know of data scientists with degrees in biology working on doing ad what do you say, customized ad, showing customized ads to users and things like that.
Wow.
Or people who are working in a large newspaper with a PhD in astrophysics and things like that. So it's not like your background may not really be what you will end up doing in data science. So you should be prepared to learn and adapt to the scenario. And the other is, it's always useful to be a good software developer, even for a data scientist who is primarily doing research or building prototypes. It's always useful to be a good software developer.
Perfect.
For product managers, maybe they are not that much into actual writing code part, but then they should still be comfortable understanding what is happening. It's very difficult to, without looking at some form of code or at least using some small amount of code, I think it is very difficult to understand what exactly is happening.
Perfect. So those are some starting steps. And thank you for the great advice, Sowmya. We do have an extra question. If you don't mind, we can answer that, or we can quickly close.
Maybe one last question.
Okay. So Pawan Kumar asks us, what's your current project that you're working on?
Okay, so I'm currently working on two projects. It's hard to explain. So one of them is doing some kind of like there's a large body of work in machine translation from many different languages, but we don't know if the translated text is actually understandable by people. Like it can be very complex language.
Okay.
So one project I'm currently working on is to develop some kind of measure which compares translation with the source language text and provide some kind of an analysis of whether this text is actually difficult to read in the translated language and whether the translation itself could have been better.
Wow. Okay.
And the other project I am working on, it's like I don't lead that project, but I play a small role in that project. It actually was mentioned in New York Times yesterday. It's a project with economics.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we analyzed patents again for a similar kind of thing. Like there are patents filed by universities and patents filed by companies. This was a study by economists. Like I mean, I wrote the programming part of it, but the paper is really an economics paper. I understand more than half of it because they do a lot of econometric models and things like that. But it's the goal of it is to quantify the amount of disclosure in patents.
Wow. Okay.
Using NLP. So it's just mentioned in New York Times yesterday, saying these are
Congratulations
the
on getting featured then. So
yeah.
much stuff happening for you. Well, Sowmya, I think we did run over our specified time.
Yeah,
So
2
much.
minutes.
I know it's a busy morning for you, yet you spared time for us. We at Apxor are very grateful, and the conversation has been awesome. I'm sure the audience agrees with me. Thank you so much, Sowmya.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope you're not too disturbed by my toddler's noises in the background. It's, I
That
mean,
is
it's a
the experience.
morning, so it's,
Very super
uh,
modern that way. Well, thank you again. Thank you for joining. And I hope we get to talk to you again because this field changes and we'll keep having more questions from us, from the audience, and from everyone. So we hope to see
uh,
you again here.
yeah, it will be good, good to do this again. Like I very much enjoyed doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Soumya. Have a great weekend. And
Yeah,
thank
you
you
too.
to our audience for spending this time with us. We are very grateful. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining in on Open Discussions with Apxor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.